All right, great. So here we are. We're very fortunate today to have Ms. Jasmine Jones, who's a senior standards analyst at B Lab, who's going to be talking with us about using business as a force for good, the basics of the B Corp certification. So if you're not familiar with what B Lab or B Corp certification is, from their own website, we know that B Lab's goal is to accelerate a culture shift to harness the power of business to help address society's greatest challenges. Their vision is of an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system for all people and the planet. And B Lab pursues this goal by verifying credible leaders in the business community, creating supportive infrastructure and incentives for others to follow their lead, and engaging the major institutions with the power to transform our economy. So Ms. Jasmine Jones is here representing one of the most prominent and interesting business certification entities that we've seen in the last few years. She comes to us from Washington University in St. Louis, where she studied international and global studies. And then since then has been at B Lab for about 5 years. That seems like an accurate figure, 5 years or so. Okay. And so rather than listen to me talk, I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine. So thanks so much for joining us once again.
Hi, everyone, and thanks again, Jordan, for organizing this. I'm very honored to be able to speak to you all today about the B Corp movement and the certification. It's been a while since I've done any public speaking engagements, so I was glad to be able to raise my hand to speak to you all today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so here we are. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, I can see it. That looks good.
Oh, so let me see if I can click through. Okay, there we are. Great. So yeah, I will, as Jordan mentioned, I will be talking about the B Corp certification, the basics of the certification, about B Lab and why we do what we do and how we do what we do. And so, yes, as Jordan mentioned, yeah, I graduated from Washington University in St. Louis in 2015. I am originally from St. Louis by way of Ferguson, so did not leave home until I graduated from college, and B Lab is actually the first real job that I had, and I'm still here. So I am very passionate about using business as a force for good. I did study international and area studies with the focus on sustainable development. And then I had a minor in Spanish as well, which has become very helpful with my work at B Lab. Today I am a senior standards analyst. So I do focus on large enterprises and multinational companies. And then I also do work with companies of all sizes in Spanish-speaking countries as well. So this is a little bit of framing about B Lab and what our mission is. And so B Lab was founded in 2007 by some of the corporate leaders at &One. So they actually sold that company in the early 2000s or late 90s. And they noticed that all of the great policies and practices that they had put in place while they were a company were just slashed away by the new management and the new owners. So they wanted to create a certification that would allow businesses to be mission aligned while still growing, just making sure that companies are able to maintain their mission over time. So our main vision is that one day all companies will compete to be best for the world, and as a result, society will enjoy more shared and durable prosperity. So this mission and vision hasn't changed since I've been working at B Lab. It's just that the ways in which we work to achieve this mission have changed slightly. As the market changes, as there's more consumer and business awareness about certifications like the B Corp certification. And so we still are grounded in this vision. So we do try to have an integrated approach to systems change. that makes this change more viable, digestible, and scalable for companies and for the economy in general. And so we do that through three main initiatives. The first being the B Corp certification, which is our third-party verified standards to assess companies on their positive social and environmental performance. We also have what we call our impact management. So that's where we create tools to make it easier for other types of companies that aren't certified B Corps to also follow the principles of the B Corp movement. We're also working on this through the benefit corporation legislation. So that's helping change legal structure so that companies are able to scale while also maintaining their mission over time. And so through these different initiatives, we are trying to achieve these different steps in order to achieve our vision of shared and durable prosperity. So there's some little background and framing about how B Lab came to be. So we're working from shifting from shareholder capitalism, which holds shareholder primacy as the most important part of a business. So maximizing profits for shareholders, which can be very extractive, exclusive, and very focused on like a mono structure. We're moving towards stakeholder capitalism, which we find to be, or we're trying to achieve this vision of it being regenerative, inclusive, and actually just celebrated. I'm really bad at math. Is that we actually just did a New York Times spread to kind of combat Milton Friedman's very famous social responsibility of businesses essay. So we're still trying to work on getting businesses and people working within the economy to kind of shift from just thinking of business as being extractive just for a certain type of people, not involving the stakeholders that are affected by your business, and being really focused on investors and making money. So as we've seen like this shift, this cultural shift, we've also noticed an evolution of business as well. So there's the rise of the climate movement, the stock market crash, different movements, Occupy Wall Street, the $15 strike, $15 an hour strike, different world disasters that have occurred as well. The main one these days is the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're realizing that in order to combat a lot of the ills and instability and inequities in the world, we need to find a new economic system by which to operate so that we're including everyone in the system and not just wealthy traditional capitalist folk. So over the past 20 years, we've noticed that there has been a focus on good products. So you might see some of these labels on some of the foods that you might be buying or some of the products that you might be buying in stores. So USDA organic, fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, LEED, which is a certification for green buildings, FSC, and then Energy Star appliances, which is pretty popular, pretty commonplace for electrical appliances. But the B Corp certification don't just certify good products, we certify companies. So we're not just looking at the products that a company is selling, we're looking at the entire company when we assess them so that we're able to assess the whole of a company and not just the product. And so what that means is we're going to be looking at your community engagement. We're going to be looking at your environmental practices. We're going to be looking at how you treat your workers and not just the great products that you sell. not just one aspect of the products that you sell. So we like to describe the B Corp certification as being to business what fair trade is to coffee, or what LEED is to a building. And we do it through 3 main initiatives, as I mentioned earlier. So the first is through impact measurement. And so our B Corp assessment is actually the B Impact assessment. The B Impact assessment is actually a free tool that anyone can use to assess a business or their organization. We do actually have some nonprofit organizations that do assess themselves against our standards, even though they aren't eligible to certify, because we only certify for-profit businesses. And so the B Impact assessment itself is an impact measurement tool that allows companies to benchmark themselves against other people who have also taken the B Impact assessment, and for them to find ways to improve upon their social and environmental impact. Another initiative that we have is the B Corp certification itself, and so that is our bread and butter and what we mainly focus on as an organization. As of today, I just looked at the metrics. We have 3,578 B Corps around the world who have achieved at least 80 points on our B Impact assessment, which is the performance requirement that we have outset for companies that do want to be certified. And then our third main initiative is benefit governance, and that's where you may have heard of a benefit corporation. And that is where we are helping companies to be able to lock mission into the DNA of their company, so that when they are scaling, or when they do have new management or new ownership, that they're able to still include stakeholders in making their decisions, and not just the shareholders of the company. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have over 3,500 certified B Corps in 150 industries. I'm sure it's more than that from when this slide was created, in 65 countries, and we still have that one unifying goal. Go back. Great. So this is a slide from one of our some of our more well-known B Corps. You might recognize some of these B Corps that you might shop with. Ben & Jerry's is a really popular one. Seventh Generation is also very popular. Cabot Creamery you might see in the grocery store. So very impactful companies, and we're seeing that it is possible for larger and more popular companies to also meet our standards, and also have them want to be part of this movement. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the value of the certification, and I'm not on the BD or business development team. So if I do mess up these slides a little bit, I do apologize in advance. I'm more on the standard side, so I'm very to explain the benefits of certification. But these are some of the main benefits that companies see in joining the B Corp community. So you're joining a global community of leaders that are all committed to using their business for more than just making a profit. You're using the B Impact assessment to benchmark and improve your impact. You're differentiating yourself from competitors. So you're different than companies in your industry. You have a higher purpose and a higher goal that you're working towards. You're able to attract mission-aligned talent, so people that are really interested in working for a mission-aligned company and working for a company that cares about their employees and cares about their environmental and community impact. And then you're able to protect your mission. So as I mentioned earlier, being able to bake in stakeholder consideration when you're making decisions and not just thinking about the shareholders of the company. So this is our global community. So we have Sistema Bay, which is mostly our Latin American countries, including South America and Central America as well. So any Spanish speaking or companies that speak Portuguese, so mainly Brazil, are in Sistema B. B Lab UK is the UK, of course. Then we have B Lab Europe. We also have B Lab Australia and New Zealand. We have B Lab Taiwan. We have B Lab East Africa. And then we have B Lab Canada. We also have market builders, which are regions where we don't have as much engagement from companies that are interested in being a certified B Corp, but they are scaling up to become have their own B Lab. And those market builders are China, Japan, Hong Kong, and Macau, and Korea, and Singapore and Malaysia. So we do see that nearly 50% of our B Corp community is actually located outside of B Lab in Canada. I believe that it was 45% the last time I checked the metrics. But we do use a global community network to find and identify companies and also engage with those companies after they do achieve the B Corp certification, because we realize that a staff of 100 based in the United States is not going to have that local knowledge or that local expertise to be able to engage with these companies. So we do depend heavily on folks that are actually living in those regions and know the cultural values of that region to be able to engage any interested companies. We still do house the verification within our organization, but in terms of the engagement, the different marketing, the benefits that these, we call them global partners, are able to provide to their companies, that is a more tailored approach based on the market. We also have some multinational engagement. And so we realized that it might be really difficult for a really large company that has subsidiaries in all areas of the world to be able to achieve the B Corp certification in one fell swoop. So we do have some parent companies that are committed to eventually becoming a certified B Corp. I believe Danone and Unilever have both publicly said that they want to become a certified B Corp, and they're achieving that through slowly but surely certifying one subsidiary at a time. So we do have a host of Danone subsidiaries that are certified, the largest of them being Danone North America. And then we also do have some subsidiaries that do belong to parent companies that might not be interested in certification, but are independent enough in their operations to where they have been able to achieve the B Corp certification. And some examples of that are listed on the slide as well. And so just to talk a little bit about benchmarking and improving impact, Eileen Fisher, which is one of our more well-known B Corps, this is actually their B Impact score. For every certified B Corp that does certify, we do require that they have their score that they achieved on the assessment, and that is posted publicly on our website. For some companies, for example, the wholly owned subsidiaries and the public companies, we do require that they make their entire assessment transparent with some redacted information. So that's just us being very transparent in our standards and how companies were able to achieve the score of the minimum score of 80 points. So if you do actually go onto a company's B Impact profile, you'll actually be able to click into governance, and you'll see what they scored in that section and the different subsections and how they scored in those sections as well. And then we also give companies some data about their comparison to ordinary businesses that have filled out the assessment, as well as a comparison of their score to other certified B corporations. So companies are able to benchmark their performance and take a look at how they're performing on the assessment, and then come up with or find improvements within the assessment from that benchmarking data. So as I was talking about a little bit earlier, the B Corp assessment allows you to get a baseline. So most of the B impact assessment, or actually all of it, is a self-assessment before you submit for review. So you are going to get a baseline when you complete the assessment. You're going to be able to set goals for improvement. So we actually do have goal functionality in the B impact assessment. You can click, I think it might be a star in the assessment, and you can set a goal and a timeline for when you want to achieve that goal. And then we also have a tailored improvement report, which will pull some of the questions that you didn't achieve maximum points on, and will help you to kind of rank the difficulty of making those types of improvements, because we realize that, you know, creating a policy might be a little bit different than being able to hire 50% more women over a year or something like that. So you're able to kind of map out where you want to improve, what areas of the assessment you score lower on, and then also kind of filter them based on the difficulty of achieving those different improvements. And then you're also able to track your performance over time. Now, for the certified B Corps, you have to, in order to maintain your certification, you do have to recertify every 3 years. So that so having your initial assessment score and refilling that assessment 3 years later will be a way that you're able to track your performance over time. But if you are just using the B impact assessment to kind of measure your performance, you're also able to schedule dates in the we call it the impact app to revisit those questions over time. So I'm not sure how up to date this data is, but we are finding that consumers are becoming more and more aware, and are requiring more of the companies that they're purchasing from. So they're not just wanting companies that, you know, are good quality. They're also wanting companies that show that they have values, and that they have a mission, and that they care about the environment, that they care about their workers. And so we really tap into that brand trust that consumers are requiring of companies nowadays. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, being able to differentiate your stuff, not your stuff, your company and your stuff from competitors. Having a holistic certification that's not just looking at like your products, because that's what anyone can, like, not anyone, but a lot of companies do have that organic certification, which shows that they are better than, you know, a regular company that might not have that certification. But having that organic stamp doesn't really tell you about how that company is treating their workers. It doesn't tell you about any waste management policies that that company might have. And it's not telling you if that company has formalized civic engagement and formalized donations and other community engagement like that. So we're looking at the whole business again. The Vote Every Day campaign, and I don't want to butcher this, but we believe that we started this last year as a public awareness campaign, reminding people that voting is more than just a ballot once every 4 years. Every day you're voting with the choices that you make, whether you're buying from a fair trade company, or you're using a service that's from a woman-owned business, or something like that. So voting with your values and living in your values is an everyday process, and not just something that we do every once in a while. And so this is some of our data. Again, I'm not sure how outdated this is, but we do find that B Corps do have more engaged employees. We actually do have some questions in the B Impact Assessment that specifically ask companies about satisfaction and engagement surveys, as well as the mechanisms that they have in place for employees to be able to give their feedback to leadership. And so on average, 65% of B Corp employees are engaged, and that's versus less than 30% at ordinary businesses. Again, this is coming from data that is pulled from the people that fill in the B impact assessment on a daily basis. And then B Corps are 46% more likely to have more engaged employees than other businesses. And then also, as I mentioned a couple times already, protecting your mission is allowing a company to bake the values and the mission of the company so that it can survive over time, and it's not just a temporary thing, because companies are making a legal change. It's not like they're coming up with something that they're putting on their website and saying like, we are committed to doing this. It's like they have to go in and file and change their articles of incorporation to actually bake their mission into the company itself. So it's allowing them to be able to scale in a mission aligned way. And then one of our case studies in being able to in determine or us showing how important it is to protect your mission is Whole Foods. So when you notice that, like when they sold to Amazon, there was like a hoopla, a lot of press around it, and we've seen like over in the news, like they're really focused on growth and profit and making more and more money. And they're noticing that some of the missions that they once had are now being, carved away little by little. So if they had that mission alignment before they sold, I'm pretty sure it would be looking like a different company than it does today. We also do have some companies that do use the B Corp certification to be able to find mission-aligned capital, and Allbirds is one of our cases for that. I'm sure a lot of people have seen Allbirds, the shoe that I think they're the shoe of Silicon Valley. I've seen when I lived in San Francisco for about 3 months. I saw them everywhere. They just opened a store here in Philly in our center city, and so companies that are able to grow but still be mission aligned, I think is really important. I think that companies are seeing that's a possibility, just because they are prioritizing their stakeholders and not just taking a look at profit. They are still able to raise capital. Great. So this is the part that I know a lot about, the certification process, because I am a standards analyst. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our certification process and what that looks like. So the B Corp certification requirement, the first is that the company must get a verified score possible to the assessment out of 200. That's not even 50%, or but getting 80 points assessment is actually very difficult to achieve, because the assessment is just a questionnaire of 20 points. It's depending upon the size of your company, it can be anywhere from 120 to 200 questions. And so getting this verified score of 80 points is actually a very high bar to achieve. There's also a legal requirement that we have for all certified B corporations. And so if you're an LLC, that would just mean amending your operating agreement. But if you are a corporation in a state or a country where we do have a legal path determined, you do have a certain time frame in order to become either a benefit corporation or to amend your articles of incorporation to include those as a requirement to be able to keep your certification. Then also, as I mentioned earlier, that B impact report, which is your score and the breakdown of what you scored in each area of the assessment, that is a requirement that all certified B Corps have to do, is to make that transparent on our B Corp directory that we have on our website. So the B impact assessment has various areas that it covers. It will cover the governance of a company. So that's looking at the mission of the company. That's looking at if the company has a board of directors with different stakeholders on it. That's looking at the ethics of the company. If the company has a code of ethics, for example, if the company has anti-corruption policies, and how transparent the company is. So if the company has a public impact report, a public sustainability report, if the company is sharing who the beneficial owners of the company are, if the company is sharing their financials, for example, or at least sharing their financial performance with their own employees. Also within the governance section is that mission lock, which is what I talked about earlier, the benefit corporation conversion or the legal amendment to a company's articles. We also have an entire section on workers. So this is taking a look at the compensation that workers are receiving, if there is a living wage determined in that country, if your employees are receiving a living wage, what types of benefits you're offering to your employees, and if those benefits are offered to just a percentage of your employees, or they offered to everyone regardless of the level of that employee. It's also taking a look at training and education that the company makes available to continuously develop their employees. And it's also taking a look at job flexibility. So that's taking a look at if you have flexible flex schedules. So for example, if an employee has to take their children to work or have to take off for a certain day, do you allow your employees to be able to have flexibility in their work schedule, or are your work schedules rigid? We find that having more flexible work schedules makes a work environment more inclusive, because you're able to hire all types of people from all types of works of life. We also have a community section, which is focused on engagement, things like job creation, diversity and inclusion of the company, your civic engagement. So how are you working within the communities in which your business is impacting? If you're sourcing from local and the types of standards that you have of your suppliers. So not just looking at if you're purchasing from local suppliers, but also looking at if you screen your suppliers for social or environmental standards. We also have an environment section. So that's taking a look at the day-to-day operations of the company, as well as the product or the services themselves. So we're looking at your facilities. We're looking at the energy that you use for your facilities. We're looking at if you have waste management programs. We're looking at if you have an environmental management system so that you're tracking your environmental impact of your operations over time. We're looking at what types of materials are going into the products that you make. Are you using products that are more environmentally preferred? We're also looking at your outputs. What are you doing to manage the waste that you produce? Do you have a waste management plan? What do you do with hazardous waste? Are you working to reduce the amount of hazardous waste that you produce? And then we're also looking at the transportation and the distribution, and also the environmental impact of your suppliers as well. So it's not just looking at the company, it's also looking at how you consciously choose your suppliers and your suppliers' environmental impact. So the gray bubbles that I just mentioned are all part of our operational impact. So it's a little confusing, but the B impact assessment is broken into two ways that we look at a company. The first is operational impact, and that's how a company looks day to day. So that's your HR, that's your governance, that's your community, that's your environment. And the red impact business models are how or what the main social or environmental impact the company has. So the gray bubbles are day to day. The impact business model, if you do have products, that's going to look at how impactful your product is. So for example, toxin reduction, that's the impact business model, where if you sell organic certified products, that's where we're going to capture that impact. If you, for example, have a workforce development program where you intentionally hire people that have barriers to employment, like people that have been previously incarcerated, that's where we're going to capture a great impact like that. If your company is worker owned, so it's not just the owners and the executives have ownership in the company, if at least 40% of your non-executive employees and managers have ownership in the company, we can capture that impact there, and a host of other impacts. But we try to separate out your day-to-day policies and practices from the core social or environmental impact that your business model is looking to achieve. And this is a comparison slide of a certified B corporation and a benefit corporation. So not all benefit corporations are certified B corporations, but if you are a certified B corporation in a state that has benefit corporation legislation, you have to become a benefit corporation. So the benefit corporation is a legal structure like an LLC or corporation, and you're able to do this on your own. You do not have to get B Lab involved to become a benefit corporation at all. You can go to your own, I believe the Secretary of State for the different states, and file and say that you want to be a benefit corporation. But the difference between that and the certified B corporation is that the B corporation is a third-party certification that is only conferred by B Lab. And so you have to have that minimum score of 80 points. You have to go through that verification process, and you also have to make that legal commitment. So it's a little bit different, and we find that some people will use the term interchangeably, but it is a little bit different. This is the roadmap for the B Corporation certification. So the first thing you're going to do is log in, make your profile, and fill in the questions in the B Impact assessment. Then you're going to understand a little bit of the legal requirement that you might have based on the corporate structure of your company. It's also going to be important for you to get team and leadership buy-in, because we find that sometimes there might be a champion who might think that the certification is very important within a company, but they haven't really checked with the management or the executives of the company. So there's not that buy-in that this is also important to leadership. So it's really important to make sure you get that buy-in before you undergo this very rigorous process, because the B Corp certification isn't where you just fill in the assessment, you submit it, we're like, okay, you're certified. It's actually a process that is very, very involved. So you have to submit your B Impact assessment, and there is an entire verification process. So what we typically do for a company, depending upon their size, you will submit your assessment. We will evaluate the company, do a preliminary evaluation to see where your score is, and if it still is around 80 points, we'll allow you to enter into the verification process with one of our standards analysts, and that standards analyst will pull questions from the assessment that they want to review with you, and there will be a random selection of documentation for some of your higher scoring questions in the assessment. There will also be required documentation for the impact business models, which were those red buckets in the previous slide. Because those sections of the assessment are the most heavily weighted and the highest score. We really want to make sure that the company does have the impact that it says it has, and that it meets our standards. And so there is documentation for that section as well. So after you're finished doing your documentation, you may or may not have a review call with your standards analyst, which will review other questions in the assessment just to make sure that the assessment was filled in correctly, that you have an understanding of the standards, and that we might need to make some adjustments to get a more accurate score. After you're finished with that entire verification process, you also go through a final, what we call an assessment check. That is where another standards analyst who did not work on the process with you, so we have another person, will review that assessment to make sure there was nothing missed in the review. So that's an additional check on top of the verification that you've already gone through. We just want to make sure that the company is meeting the 80-point standards, and that nothing was missed in that review. And so after you become certified, there are certain time frames for when you have to meet that legal requirement. So for some companies already come in with the legal requirement completed, but if you don't, you do have a certain time frame to complete that conversion. So you don't have to meet the legal requirement when you submit, but at least I believe for benefit corporation, I believe it's 2 years within your initial certification that you have to make sure that that benefit corporation legislation is conversion is completed for your company. And then the finalization is signing our B Corp agreement. That is just all the terms of the certification, how long the certification is, what was involved in the certification. It'll have the fee structure, which we also have transparent on our website. We also have within that B Corp agreement the Declaration of Interdependence. And after that, you would pay your annual fees. That depends on the revenues of the company. If you are within a bucket where you have to pay your annual fees before certification, then we will tell you that. But for most large companies, you don't have to pay the annual fee until after you complete the certification process. And this is actually our Declaration of Interdependence, and the last slide I believe that I have. And so if anyone wants to read that, I'll give you some time to read that to see what our values are and what we make every certified B Corp sign at the end of the process.
Well, Jasmine, that was really great. And while people are reviewing this, if you have any additional questions you'd like to ask, you can type them into the Q&A area. There's some really excellent questions that have been posted here. And if you've got a few minutes, hopefully you can help us work through them.
Actually, faster than I thought.
That was really great. That was really great. And so I know the other audience can't clap for you, but I will clap for you, and we'll assume that everyone else is also clapping for you. If you want to end, sharing your screen, then we can move to some of our questions and answers here. So, we ended up with about 60 people in our session today, which is really great. And if you have to step out, if you pose a question, but you have to leave for some reason, please know you can check out the recording of the event later on, and your question will be discussed there. So we had some questions, Jasmine, about life at B Lab and what your role is actually like, and then also some kind of conceptual questions about the certification process. So from our friend Denise Coogan, who is an excellent sustainability leader at Subaru of America, who joined us today. She wanted to know, does the World Bank recognize B Corp and promote it? And are there any automotive companies that you know of that are certified?
Okay, the World Bank, I'm actually not sure, but I can check on that if Jordan, you want to keep a list of questions, and I can chase up any information that people have that I don't have an answer to. But I'm not sure about the World Bank recognizing the B Corp certification. We do have a partnership with the Sustainable Development Goals, so that is an international body that does recognize the B Corp standards. But I'm not sure about any other organizations of that nature.
Sure. So Sean is a student of sustainable business class with me, and he wanted to know, are there any special regulations regarding B corporations? And I think he's asking about this distinction between benefit corporations and B certified. Are there any rules for companies that are just B certified but maybe not benefit corporations?
I'm not sure what you mean by rules or regulations. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, so any additional like legal obligations for B Corps that maybe are not yet benefit corporations legally speaking?
We don't have any legal obligations for B Corps besides the benefit corporation legislation, but we do have the only negative screen that we have is our disclosure questionnaire. So for companies that have anything that needs to be disclosed, so for example, if there was a fatality at their job site, or if they've used special corporate structures or things to reduce their taxes. Are things that companies have to disclose. If they're in certain industries, like the cannabis industry, or in higher education, we have requirements for companies of that type. So not so much legal regulations, but we do have um, screens for companies in terms of their ethics and how they operate in order to become a certified B Corp and to maintain that certification. So for companies that do have those types of controversial issues, we do require them to provide us information about that. And our disclosures committee will do a review of that information. And then if it is deemed material, then those companies either have to remediate the things that they are doing, or completely stop the things that they are doing. And they also have to disclose those practices publicly on their profile. So you might see with like larger companies that there's a separate tab in their B Impact profile that you can click into and see what those controversial or the disclosures are, and what the company is doing to remediate those things.
That's interesting. Very interesting. We had some other questions about issues regarding disclosure, and the chair of our very own accounting and finance department here at Rowan, Dr. Stephanie Weidman, wanted to know, have you found the requirement to disclose ratings has discouraged publicly traded companies from pursuing assessment? Is that an issue at all?
Um, I don't think it has discouraged them really, because that's a requirement for all companies, regardless of whether you're a large public company or a small sole proprietor company. So I don't think that has really discourage them. I would say that with larger companies, they do have more resources, and so there is a little bit more work on our end to make sure that we get things right in terms of the assessment score and the questions, and so there is more back and forth on like individual questions within the assessment to make sure that the score we are presenting to the public is an accurate score. So I would say it doesn't discourage them, but does require a different level of I would say engagement and customer service that B Lab does have to provide to those larger companies.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. Why you would decide to pursue this or not. And Anthony here, another one of our sustainable business students, he wondered, have there been any larger, well-known companies that have refused to certify or kind of denounced the whole concept of reporting for some reason or another?
I don't know if we've had companies that have really denounced. I think maybe the closest to that was Bob Mackey from Whole Foods. He had like public conversations with our co-founder Jay Cone Gilbert about how he realizes that he probably should have become a benefit corporation or a B Corp earlier, before the changes that happened after the sale of Whole Foods. So I think that was the largest. We do have some larger companies that um, have had their certification inactive because they were either unwilling or unable to make the legal conversion, which is really important. So for companies that are in that situation, we recommend that companies make the legal change before they become public or have an IPO, because it's going to be way more difficult to change your legal or your corporate structure after that than before. And I think that's happened with some of our larger B Corps.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that would be a very material type of change to make in the middle of an IPO or after you've gone public or anything like that. So two theoretical questions about B Corp. One from Christian, one of our environmental studies students. What would B Corp do in response to large social media companies or any social media companies such as Facebook, Snapchat, or Instagram? And do you think those are even viable businesses to certify?
So we don't really make judgments on what type of company is able to get certified, but those types of companies would undergo additional review of their data and how they share people's data and how they sell people's data, and then that goes back to the controversial industries or the disclosure questionnaire. And so I don't think that we would discourage a company from pursuing certification, but we will like be upfront with the company that there will be additional transparency and remediation requirements that are required of that company if they do and if they are serious about becoming a certified B Corp.
Sure. So additional scrutiny is the main thing. Zach wanted to know, do you think that B Lab is directly incentivizing sustainable and stakeholder-centric businesses, or is it more an indirect approach to create like a network of businesses employing tactics and holding themselves to a higher standard? Is there a direct reward for companies that engage in certification, maybe financially or with customers or something like that?
I think that I would have to defer to our data team to see if there is like a return on investment. I think that's something that's been a question that we've had for a very long time. What is the business case for the B Corp certification? So I would check that. But I would say for that question, I think it's a both. I think it's both incentivizing sustainable stakeholder-centric business, also creating sustainability advantage, because we do have a community. We actually have what we call the Beehive, and that's where certified certified B corporations are able to share best practices and present any challenges that they're having to other companies in the industry, or share something really cool that they just implemented in terms of an environmental efficiency. So we're able to unite businesses in that way, and then also hold them to a higher standard with our assessment.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of marketing advantage if you are certified. You can talk about that, and yeah, so there's a direct benefit there.
Yeah, we have an entire
Absolutely.
B Corp brand guide that like you can, with certain standards for how you can use the logo and where it can go. And so yeah, there's definitely an incentive to become certified. I think it definitely does help with marketing.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. We had some questions more about life at B Lab and your own journey. Elizabeth also is an international studies background, and she wanted to know, how have you used your international studies background at B Lab, and do you have any advice for recent international studies graduates that maybe want to work in this area?
Yeah, I would definitely say that, yeah, when I was applying to B Lab, I didn't even think that like my degree was going to be like, relevant or like even valued when I was applying for a job at B Lab. So I would say that like for recent international studies graduates, I would say that it doesn't have to be the traditional route, because I thought I was going to be working for the State Department, or maybe was going to join the Peace Corps or something like that. So there are other alternatives for career paths. And I would say I do use my international studies degree on a day-to-day basis, especially when it comes to the cultural competencies that are required for working with companies that are in different regions. So I do work with a lot of companies in Europe. So those are the larger companies that I work with. But as I mentioned earlier, I am working on a day-to-day basis with also with companies that are in Latin American markets. So you have to be able to kind of switch. Like you're not going to talk to a company in the UK like you are going to talk with a company that's in Chile. So there is some cultural competency that is required. I also find that it helps me kind of understand how our standards were developed, and also helps me to be able to advise on their standards, make sure that our standards do have a more global lens, because admittedly our standards are a little US and European centric. And so having that IS background does help me recommend things to our standards management team, which is the team that creates the standards, help them to have a more global lens when they are creating content and creating questions for the assessment. And that's also why we do have different assessments for different markets. So we do have a developed assessment, and that's for companies that are in US and Canada. We have a developed global, so that's anyone who is in a what we call a developed country globally. We also have an emerging market assessment, which is a lot of the companies in Latin America, and then we also have the frontier market assessment, which is going to be a lot of the countries that are in Africa, or other areas. And so I think that IS expertise definitely does help at B Lab.
I'd say so. It sounds like it's a great fit for the work that you're doing. Caroline wanted to know, what does a day in the life look like for someone working at B Lab?
Maybe
Maybe
I
a
would say
typical day, not a COVID quarantine day, but
I would say it depends on the type of work that you do. So I work. So when I was first starting at B Lab, I was working with small, medium enterprise companies. So that's on a day-to-day basis. That's doing a lot of work in the assessment, looking at the company's answers in the assessment. That's looking at their website. That's scheduling review calls and reviewing documentation. So I think on a day-to-day basis, when you're first starting out at B Lab, it's a lot of assessment-centric work. Right now, I work with mainly large enterprises and multinational companies, so that's an entirely different process. It's more complicated with a whole bunch of different steps, and so I would say day to day for me with working with larger companies is like looking at the assessment as well, looking at sustainability reports, looking at any news about the company, looking at the company's website. It's also doing research on any of those things that we have in our disclosure questionnaire, so any of those negative screens. It's also just learning more about how complex these larger companies are, and really trying to understand their company structure and how they operate, so that we're able to determine how to fully verify that type of company, because you're not going to have the same verification process that you have for a larger company for a smaller one. So we find with larger companies, they're going to need multiple impact assessments to assess their entire company. So a lot of work for me is like juggling different assessments for one company.
okay, that's really interesting. It sounds like a pretty diverse thing to do day to day. Every day is a little bit different. Yeah. That's excellent. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much for your questions. We're going to look to post a recording of our event today to the Rowan Center for Responsible Leadership's YouTube page. So if you missed any of today's talk, you can check it out there. And also be sure to check out our website for more information about events like these, and more information about how you can study sustainable and responsible businesses while you're here at Rowan. So thanks so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you in the near future. Take care, everyone.